Okay. Um, so yeah, we're talking about Hegel tonight. Doug is out with family things, but we can still talk about the chapter. And I also wanted to read something from Hegel earlier in the book that I think will be very, very, very helpful for us. Um, I've sort of been leaning on Houlgate's interpretation of speculative um, reason, and it's the same as Hegel's, but I didn't realize that Hegel actually gives you a crib sheet in the book, but he doesn't like label it the crib sheet for how this stuff works, and so you kind of have to be like on your guard. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I've got my microphone very offset, and that's probably playing hell. Uh, is that better?
it's good and it's better now, but
Yeah.
good
Okay.
before.
So, but back to you. Where are we? We're in quantum, and we're right into the math section. Um,
Right, we were doing the becoming of true infinity for quantum quantity, and then it turning into ratio.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the ratio is the big.
I wonder if the street's still going up. Someone's street, yeah. Probably, yeah. But someone's street's still going up.
Yeah, I think that's Jim's background.
Yeah.
Call it,
So, so I think we start at the specific nature of the notion of the mathematical infinite. Infinite. We did, didn't we? So page 240.
Actually, we kind of were on 238, and then we went to 240. I don't think we
Okay.
ever got 238 yet.
You know what? You're right. Yeah, it was 230. It was 238, and you go through the logic, and then you get to the remark, and it's all commentary. So yeah, you're right. So so what's your take, Kyle? Infinite of quantum, the
Well,
logical portion.
yeah, my take at this point is we've shown that quantum kind of does create its own spurious infinity that it goes from always reaches out to a beyond itself because it has an external reference, which turns out to be yet another quantum. Because that if we go kind of thinking back to the concept of number, where there's the amount out there, so it's kind of that continuously happening on and on. But in that spurious infinity, it's each new quantum is itself a quantum. So in a way, they return back to itself, and that's how we come back to a true infinity. Um, Here's the part I'm trying to remember. Um, what was it?
Feel free to read straight from the text if you
Yeah. So Hegel does return back to the point that you got to remember that quantum itself is sublated quality. So what we find in the sense of the negation of the negation at this point, because the quantum has become for itself in this sense, it is a return to of quality as well from quantity. That I'm just trying to remember the particular nuances of that. Because it is the determinateness of quantity that has been fully determined, and that
like.
itself is the quality of quantity. And now we've come to a quantitative quality. Um, and so, in this sense, we do see that. Just trying to figure out what ratio comes back in.
Oh, well, so I'll just read straight off. It says quantum is thus posited
There it
as
is.
repelled from itself, with the result that there are two quanta, two, which, however, are sublated, are only as moments of one unity, and this unity is the determinateness of quantum. And quantum, as thus self-related as an indifferent limit in its externality, and therefore posited as qualitative, is quantitative ratio. So if you see a fraction, that is quantum in its determinate state?
it's fully qualitative determination. Yeah.
Self-related.
Like both the quotient and denominator itself are standard quanta. They're just moments, and each one is related to the other, kind of like what we've had in previous example. But in this case, the exponent that comes out of that is itself fixed. And then, of course, the common example is saying, well, you have like 1/4. Well, that's the same as 2/8, 3/12, etc. The ratio is the numbers on top and bottom are changing, but the ratio is staying the same.
Yeah.
So that is staying fixed. Well, kind of the numbers on the top are both finite and infinite at the same time. Finite, and then of course they're still finite quanta, but they're they're related back to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing in the commentary I found really, really cool was that with Hegel expressing the entire infinite in the ratio as opposed to what it turns into as a decimal number, some of which go off into the spurious infinity, was really interesting because you have it all in that package, and it's qualitatively different than just a single quanta, but at the same time, it's where I mean, it's like he said, it's where quantity approaches a real infinity and what that would look like and how that would be packaged, not to have something outside it, right? So if you have the fraction, it expresses everything, but if you have the thing with the what it turns into with the decimal number that goes off into infinity, then obviously the result is overturned into something outside of the result. Like you can never get to the end of the result in the decimal form, but in the ratio form, it's all right there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Even saying it sounds mystical. It's kind of weird.
That's why I guess they called Hegel a rationalist mysticist or mystical rationalist.
There you go.
It comes out sounding mystical, but it's all entirely there logically.
Yeah, rational numbers can be expressed as in terms of infinite series.
Right. Like even pi can be equated to an infinite series, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
pi is not a rational number, but rational numbers can be equated to infinite series as well.
Jumped out
Yeah.
too far there, but yeah, like even some transcendental numbers can, which is yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Pi often gets treated as a rational number in our like common sense discourse. You know, like, oh gee whiz, look at what this thing is doing, and you know, in reality, it's probably better to it's probably better to figure out how you can express it as a ratio because it's all there, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
have to just keep going. There's no need to calculate to, you know, 1,000 decimal places of pi. All you have to do is turn it back into a ratio, and it's all there. It's gonna do its work, creating the circle or whatever you want, whatever you want it to do. If you have like a computer program that you put it into. Anyway,
Pi cannot be written as a ratio of two natural numbers.
it can't. Okay, well, never
Right.
mind.
That's what transcendental means. Yeah.
That's why it's irrational. But
Oh my gosh! So it can't be done either way. Okay, all right, that's a new one on me. I think I remember it's like something over a square root or something like that. Negative square. I don't know.
Or the phi, the golden
well,
ratio.
square root 2 is also an irrational number, so
Yeah.
you can't write that as the ratio of two natural numbers.
At least algebraic.
Algebraic, yeah.
And then if it's above algebraic, that's transcendental, like pi.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's
I and
20,
D.
it's 22/7.
That's the decent approximation. Yeah.
Yeah, even that's an approximation. It says, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, and it's got like a chart that goes down. Oh,
There's a three
You're like-
digit version that's
it's
better.
like 3 + 1/1, 7 + 1/1, 15 + 1/1, 1 plus. I mean, just Wow. Okay.
Now I'm thinking about the one person who tried to code into law that pi is 3.
Yeah.
That, yeah. Sorry, you failed.
And it took a math, and everyone was like, "Oh, this seems fine." And then mathematician had come in like, "No."
Reminds me of the story of the
Indiana
mathematician who
Python.
went to court
Oh,
and there's a story out there in like ancient or medieval history where the mathematician comes to court and proves the king wrong or something like that. I forget. Oh, Jim, you're an encyclopedist practically. Do you remember that story?
No.
Okay. All right. I do know Leibniz was a courtier and he would
Yeah. Oh yeah. He supposedly, or not Leibniz, might have been, yeah, I think it might have been Leibniz, supposedly played a trick on Diderot.
oh yeah. Yeah.
It's an apocryphal story because, for one thing, we know that Diderot actually knew math, had a pretty good knowledge of math, but it's still a funny story.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read up on that.
The story was he presented an algebraic equation and said, therefore, God exists. Because Diderot was an atheist, but
Okay, that's the story I remember now, because it had to do with proving that God exists. And I mean it even makes it into this, the proof that God exists, shown philosophically is like uh, a perennial question uh, through the Middle Ages and up through the early modern period. And now we're in.
even in the 20th century, people like Kurt Gödel he had his own version of the ontological argument, and a few other philosophers, Norman Malcolm, did too. But
Yeah, it amazes me how far the reaction went after Hegel to just bury the Enlightenment and the radical Enlightenment. It I don't know, it kind of boggles my mind that we're in as thoroughly reactionary an era as we are in. And Spinoza and Hegel were like 250, 300 years ago. Now, like, where the hell are we headed? Anyway, all right, but before we get too far into the quantum part, or maybe we want to get farther into the quantum part. I don't know. I wanted to read off the crib sheet that I found because it just. But I may have to. Hang on just a second.
okay.
Okay, false alarm. All right, the crib sheet. This might take just a few minutes to do, but
Mhm.
yeah. Hey, here. Hmm? All right. If you guys could turn to page 90 for me and follow along.
I do this right.
Sure.
Here we go. Oh, interesting. I see what we're doing here now. Okay, see if I can make this sized appropriately. There we go.
And this is more for the YouTube audience of none.
No,
in
we
any
had
case.
comments yesterday.
Oh, did we? Good.
Hey,
Jimmy? Oh.
that readable?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at my book, but
Okay, just as if it looks good on the screen, that's it.
maybe hit it one more up, just for the people reading. There you go. All right, so I'm going to read this off because I mean this is the crib sheet, although he's talking about the specific case, and really I find when Hegel's talking about anything to do with the method, you can't really talk about the method without talking about an application of the method. So, so here we go. Page 90, remark 2 is called the defectiveness of the expression unity, identity of being a nothing. All right. And he says, another contributory reason for the repugnance to the proposition about being a nothing must be mentioned. This is that the result of considering being and nothing, as expressed in the statement being and nothing are one and the same, is incomplete. The emphasis is laid chiefly on their being one and the same, as in judgments generally, where it is the predicate that first states what the subject is. Consequently, the sense seems to be that the difference is denied, although at the same time it appears directly in the proposition, i.e., being and nothing are the same. For this enunciates both determinations, being and nothing, and contains them as distinguished. At the same time, the intention cannot be that abstraction should be made from them and only the unity retained, right? Such a meaning would be self-evidently one-sided, because that from which abstraction is to be made is equally present and named in the proposition. Now, insofar as the proposition being and nothing are the same asserts the identity of these determinations, but in fact equally contains them both as distinguished, the proposition is self-contradictory and cancels itself out. Bearing this in mind and looking at the proposition more closely, we find that it has a movement which involves the spontaneous vanishing of the proposition itself. But in thus vanishing, there takes place in it that which is to constitute its own particular content, namely becoming. Okay, so he's talking about a couple things here. So you see, being and nothing, as named, are distinguished. We call them two different things. But if we look at the determinations of being and nothing all the way at the beginning, and we find that being is devoid of any determinations, and so is nothing, and nothing itself turns out to be devoid of determinations just as much as being, it is said to be just the same as being, right? And so there you go. They're distinguished, but they're not. But a proposition will not, a simple proposition with a subject and predicate, such as being and nothing, are one and the same, right? One and the same being the predicate, and the subject being and nothing. So there you go. The proposition thus contains the result. It is this in its own self. But the fact to which we must pay attention here is the defect that the result is not itself expressed in the proposition. Nowhere in the sentence being and nothing are one and the same is the result becoming. Okay, is what he's saying. It is an external reflection which discerns it therein. In this connection, we must at the outset make this general observation, namely that the proposition in the form of a judgment is not suited to express speculative truths. And here's the crib sheet. A familiarity with this fact is likely to remove many misunderstandings of speculative truths. Judgment is an identical relation between subject and predicate. In it, we abstract from the fact that the subject has a number of determinatenesses other than that of the predicate, and also that the predicate is more extensive than the subject. Now, if the content is speculative, the non-identical aspect of subject and predicate is also an essential moment. But in the judgment, this is not expressed. It is the form of simple judgment when it is used to express speculative results. It is the form of simple judgment when it is used to express speculative results, which is very often responsible for the paradoxical and bizarre light in which much of recent philosophy appears to those who are not familiar with speculative thought. People like Schopenhauer at the time that Hegel was giving his, at the end of his life, giving his lectures, the late 1820s and early 1830s. Note here, it is the form of simple judgment when it is used to express speculative results, which is very often responsible for the paradoxical and bizarre light in which much of recent philosophy appears. If you read Marx or Engels or Lenin or Trotsky on what they call dialectical materialism, roughly the content of reasoning that they come across with is the same, more or less. They're dealing with external matters, and how they are not only understood, but understood so that you could change the world, so to speak. I would argue that Hegel is dealing with the same thing, but he is dealing with it at such a level where Hegel was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. You couldn't even get to the point where you could think about things to where you could change things. Kant's last word in philosophy was that you can know subjectively what's around you, but you can never know objectively what those things are. And that is what Hegel set out to correct with his philosophy. So I'll go on. To help express the speculative truth, the deficiency is made good in the first place by adding the contrary proposition. Being and nothing are not the same. So we have sentence 1, being and nothing are one and the same. Sentence 2, being and nothing are not the same, which is also enunciated as above. But thus there arises the further defect that these propositions are not connected and therefore exhibit their content only in the form of an antinomy, just like Kant, whereas their content refers to one and the same thing. And the determinations which are expressed in the two propositions are supposed to be in complete union, a union which can only be stated as an unrest of incompatible, as a movement. Now, earlier in the sentence that I just said, notice that he said that the content refers to one and the same thing. Being and nothing are the same in that their determinations are null and void. There are no determinations in being and nothing, as they start out as sheer being and nothing, remember. So they are determinately the same thing. Let's put it that way. But they are also not. And so the unrest of the incompatibles, think of it as the two sentences. The two sentences cause movement. Okay? What does this look like? The commonest injustice done to a speculative content is to make it one-sided, that is, to give prominence only to one of the propositions into which it can be resolved. In other words, choosing the yes, it's the same, or no, it's the same, to the detriment of the not-chosen sentence, is what he's saying, right? It cannot then be denied that this proposition is asserted, but the statement is just as false as it is true. For once one of the propositions is taken out of the speculative content, the other must at least be equally considered and stated. Particular mention must be made here of that, so to speak, unfortunate word unity. Unity, even more than identity, expresses a subjective reflection. And keep your ears peeled for this one, because he's about to talk about essence, although it's not completely clear unless you know what you're looking at. Unity, even more than identity, expresses a subjective reflection. It is taken especially as the relation which arises from comparison, from external reflection. When this reflection finds the same thing in two different objects, the resultant unity is such that there is presupposed the complete indifference to it of the objects themselves which are compared, so that this comparing and unity does not concern the objects themselves and is a procedure and a determining external to them. Unity, therefore, expresses wholly abstract sameness and sounds all the more blatantly paradoxical the more the terms of which it is asserted show themselves to be sheer opposites. So far, then, it would be better to say only unseparatedness and inseparability, but then the affirmative aspects of the relation of the whole would not find expression, either, in other words, that there being nothing. Notice notice that the comparison and the sheer opposites appear in the doctrine of essence. And all of the determinations appear exactly as thus within the sphere of essence, which is also called reflection. Okay. There is not a single determination in the sphere of essence that is not the opposite of itself, but also roughly the same thing. Cause and effect, positive and negative. I could go on. These things do not show up in the doctrine of being, although they are implicitly the same in the other sphere. Okay? We can break out the difference between being and nothing, but we have to do so, I wouldn't say mechanically exactly, but it's harder. I don't know exactly why, but breaking out the actual difference between being and nothing and what it causes, what that difference causes, i.e. movement, is a lot harder to see. It's less, what's the word, Kyle? Not implied, but it's less intuitive. You're looking at being and nothing, and how intuitive is it to realize that they're connected opposites just as much as positive and negative is in essence. It's not as easy,
Right.
They're not organically connected in reflection. They're just what they are. They're the is. And when you get to the essence, you get to the has. I don't know if all this makes sense. I'm just repeating some of this and trying to see if it makes sense. Okay, so the last thing was, so far then it would be better than unity to say unseparatedness or inseparability. The problem, of course, is that the affirmative aspect of the relation of the whole would not find expression. Thus, the whole true result, which we have here before us, is becoming. So rather than choosing one of the sentences, we choose them both and we give them a new name. And we name the movement, and it's becoming, right? Being has passed over into nothing, nothing passes over into being. And this activity of coming to be and passing away can be best described in Hegel's ontology, and he does, as becoming, which is not merely the one-sided or abstract unity of being and nothing. I'm reading again. It consists, rather, in this movement, that pure being is immediate and simple, and for that very reason is equally pure nothing. And there is a difference between them, but a difference which no less sublates itself and is not. The result, therefore, equally asserts the difference of being a nothing, but as a merely fancied or imagined difference. Now, what does this mean? There's a difference, but it's more imagined. At this point, when we're in becoming, the moments of being a nothing are not actually self-subsistent anymore, right? So they're not different. They're the same in unity. Their sameness is carried over within within the new determination, if that makes sense. I'm just going to keep reading. It is the common opinion that being is rather the sheer other of nothing, and that nothing is clearer than their absolute difference, and nothing seems easier than to be able to state it. But it's equally easy to convince oneself that this is impossible, that it is unsayable. And he challenges the reader and the critic. Let those who insist that being and nothing are different tackle the problem of stating in what the difference consists. Because he's already defined being and nothing, of course. Their determinations are exactly the same. There's nothing there. There's no manifold. There are no determinations in sheer being and sheer nothing. If being and nothing had, and he says exactly what I said, if being and nothing had any determinatenesses by which they were distinguished from each other, then, as we have observed, they would be determinate being and determinate nothing. But the pure being and pure nothing that here, but there's still the pure being and the pure nothing, quite different. Their difference is therefore completely empty. Each of them is in the same way indeterminate. The difference then exists not in themselves, but in a third, in subjective opinion. Opinion, however, is a form of subjectivity which is not proper to an exposition of this kind. But the third, in which being and nothing subsist, must also present itself here, and it has done so. It is becoming. In this, being and nothing are distinct moments. Becoming only is, insofar as they are distinguished. This third is an other. Pay attention to this. This third, becoming, is an other than they. They subsist only in an other, which is equivalent to saying that this is the key sentence for the rest of the book, Kyle and Jim. The third is an other than they. They subsist only in an other, which is equivalent to saying that they are not self-subsistent. Okay? So when you see things like, and further on in the book, to where, what makes up the one? Can you remember, Kyle? What makes up one?
Being for itself, and then it's being for one.
Yeah, something like that. Those two determinations, once they're in one, operate within one. Yeah. Becoming is as much the subsistence of being as it is of non-being, or their subsistence is only their being in a one. It is just this, their subsistence, that equally sublates their difference. Okay, so before I read the rest of this, I'm just going to say, for the rest of the book, this pattern, and it should, the transitions cause it to show up not regularly and not in an order that you can track, that you can abstract from and turn into a science itself. Okay, because that would, I don't know what that procedure is, but I know a number of commentators have tried to do that. But the point here is that if you get two determinations that end up being in unity with each other in the process of speculative thought, in the logic or elsewhere, okay, this is the rough pattern. And it's why, if you come across a speculative category, right, you cannot neglect one side or for the other, or vice versa. They both have to be equally operative. It's like the commodity, right? The commodity has a material and a social dimension. You cannot neglect one or the other, or it ceases to be a speculative category entirely. And it just sort of becomes a proposition with a caveat that most people ignore. And the problem with latter-day Marxist writing is that often categories are used one-sidedly. And I'm sure I could write a paper if I started reading for 10 years, but I haven't done that yet. So anyway, yeah, there you go. Okay, so the challenge to distinguish between being and nothing also includes the challenge to say what then is being and what is nothing. Those who are reluctant to recognize either one or the other as only a transition of the one into the other, and who assert this or that about being and nothing, let them state what it is they are speaking of. That is, put forward a definition of being and nothing and demonstrate its correctness. Again, he gives a challenge. Without having satisfied this first requirement of the ancient science, whose logical rules they accept as valid and apply in other cases, all that they maintain about being and nothing amounts only to assertions which are scientifically worthless. A equals A. Half the time when people come at Hegel's philosophy or Marx's political and economic writing, that's really all that they end up saying, is that no, this is how it is, and it's that way because it is. A equals A. That's why, I mean, it, you know, and when you read stuff like that and you know this, what I'm reading here, it almost seems like they're insulting your intelligence. Like you're not gonna catch their sort of eliding the dialectic, is how I would put it. If elsewhere it has been said that existence, insofar as this at first is held to be synonymous with being, is the complement to possibility, then this presupposes another distinction, another determination, possibility. And so being is not enunciated in its immediacy, but in fact as not self-subsistence as conditioned. For being, which is the outcome of mediation, we shall reserve the term existence, and we've already seen that where we're reading, or around where we're. But one pictures being to oneself, perhaps in the image of pure light, as the clarity of undimmed seeing, and then nothing as pure night. And their distinction is linked with this very familiar sensuous difference. But as a matter of fact, if this very seeing is more exactly imagined, one can readily perceive that in absolute clearness there's seen just as much and as little as in absolute darkness, that the one seeing is as good as the other. That pure seeing is a seeing of nothing. Pure light and pure darkness are two voids. I see what he's doing. He's clarifying the determinations of being and nothing in pictorial representation here, which is good. Pure light and pure darkness are two voids, which are the same thing. Something can be distinguished only in determinate light or darkness. Light is determined by darkness, and so is darkened light. And darkness is determined by light, is illuminated darkness. You always see the two, right? And for this reason, that it is only darkened light and illuminated darkness which have within themselves the moment of difference and are therefore determinate being. So you notice he's pictorially shown us what a speculative truth looks like in a concrete setting. You're never just going to have blinding light or total darkness in a concrete determinate setting. And if you do, you're fast asleep or you're dead probably. But if you're dealing with determinate being, you're always going to have this duality of being and nothing. And the same thing I think can be said for all the other determinations that are a unity in this book and elsewhere, like the commodity. If you see a product on the shelf, right, and it's been sold as a commodity and bought, it's going to have both the dark and the light, the illuminated darkness and the darkened light to it. And if it doesn't, it's not a commodity. That makes sense. It's got to exist and work in the social system called capitalism, and it has to be a use value for someone. All right. And that was it. This is the section I would send someone to. Okay. Someone who is interested in dialectics and is a Marxist, but they have no idea what it means or how it works. They just sort of see it referenced everywhere. This is probably the first place I would send them. They come to me talking about the unity of opposites. Right there, that's the unity of opposites, right? Determinate being, right? An actually existing commodity, or an actually existing thought, which contains the fullness of the determinations and of which it's made up. Whether it's a unity of two or if it's not a pure unity, because
Right, it's
the
like a
log the logic doesn't just traffic in this determination plus this determination equals this new unity. If it did, there are several mistakes in the logic, and who will get already ruled out that fact because thought is determining itself, and so it's not like you have an anti-becoming, and that becomes determinate being. Becoming collapses into determinate being. It vanishes, literally vanishes. That's the term he uses, right?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like it evolves into a full spectrum, right? So you got it being a nothing, sort of there, and you find a kind of they're the same but different, so they're interrelated. And becoming kind of becomes the initial connection between the two that fills out this indeterminate state in between being nothing.
The this is interesting. So you have two determinations being a nothing,
Right.
and they create a third determination of which they're moments.
Right.
And instead of it combining with something else and becoming something else, it's the moments inside it which move to become the next, the determinate being, quality, right? And so it's, the determinations are almost like machine parts. And I'm not going to say it's a linguistic change because it's categorical, light and dark, positive and negative, being and nothing. These are states. And of course that, there's another danger word, which he doesn't like. He doesn't like these exact propositional words, definitions, theorems, axioms. All of these things are one-sided, and they can be true, but they are also equally false unless they're part of a speculative manifold that can hold everything together. And you often hear people say, well, that's impossible. You can't include everything everywhere, right? To determine everything. But the problem is if you look at this micro example from Hegel about being a nothing, we're not. We're just dealing within the realm of thought in our science lab with two determinations, okay, and examining. We're not including the entirety of the absolute. We're saying we're just dealing with these two and seeing what they are. We're in Hegel's laboratory, and he's isolated these elements and is seeing how they operate like chemicals. This is another point Marx makes about doing this kind of work, is that you can't do it like you're in a chemist lab. You have to do it through abstraction, in thought. And so, we live in an age in which so few people can do that patient work. I don't know, that's probably too pessimistic of me, but I don't know, Jim. Have you seen many people doing that kind of patient work in your neck of the woods?
Not really. Yeah.
Right.
I
So
was
we
just-
got about. Go ahead.
I was just reminded, I've said this in the past, that a lot of this was already in Plato, but Plato doesn't carry it out doesn't carry out the analysis as far as Hegel does. So for Plato, the realm of becoming, so it's the empirical world basically for Plato, and he treats that as an inferior realm to the realm of forms, which is associated more with being, even though he has to allow for nothingness even in the realm of forms, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to distinguish one form from another. But
Yeah. That's interesting. So he sees the finite as inferior,
yeah,
but he doesn't deny that the finite world exists. So
no,
it's just more in the relation of the two.
yeah, I mean, in order to have true knowledge, you have to have an understanding of the forms.
Yeah.
And that was basically what Plato distinguishes between what he calls the realm of the way of knowledge versus the way of opinion. Way of opinion is what most people never get past that.
Yeah.
Only the philosophers really get to the way of truth, or way of true knowledge.
And Hegel breaks that out in this reading. He says that dealing with the two propositions, what you end up with if you don't go to the speculative route is subjective opinion. He
Yeah.
says it directly right here.
Yeah.
He says, you know, that subjective. What does he say? He says subjective opinion is a form of subjectivity which is not proper to an exposition of this kind. But the third, in which being and nothing subsist, must also present itself here, and it has done so. It is becoming. So it's a leap. Getting to becoming from being and nothing is, it's not an intuitive leap. It's a logical result, and he calls it that. He calls it the result. But the result is not present in either of the propositions that are the moments of becoming. Interesting.
Also, as you mentioned that Hegel has his dialectic summarized in a few pages. I'm reminded that it was Marx, I think in a letter to Engels saying he was thinking of writing a synopsis of the dialectic. It would be just a few pages long, and he never actually did it. But but if he had done it, would have looked like that?
I mean, it's right here. It's right here. This is it. I really wish he made a footnote and said, forget it. Just go and read, page 90 of the A.V. Miller. Of course, A.V. Miller wasn't alive yet. But yeah, I mean, it's here in black and white. I mean, you want the unity of opposites? It's right here. And God, it's making me think of the commodity in a different way, because if people like to say that Marx wrote Capital exactly the same way that Hegel wrote the Logic, but it's not true, because if Marx wrote Capital the way he wrote the Logic, commodity wouldn't be the first. Commodity would not be the first category. The first category would be use value. And the unity of use value and value would be the commodity. Well, I mean, which it is, but he does it backwards. He gives us the commodity and tells us what the moments are of it, and tells you why historically it's so. You have to have a use in the commodity in order for it to be sold, and you have to have a social system which presents itself as trafficking in value, right? In order for it to circulate, either at the beginning of the capital circuit, MC, in order to get inserted into P production, and then it gets spit out on the other side as C prime, and then M prime. M prime is money, right? More money than went in MC. If you guys remember Capital, Volume 2. Yeah, so there it is. If Marx had rewritten Chapter 1, I guarantee you he would have started with value and broken out value as, I don't know that he would have said it like being in nothing, like positive and negative, because if you look at value and use value, I don't know. What do you think about that, Jim? you, you you get what I'm saying though?
Yeah.
Like he breaks out the first category as if to say, here's determinate being. We're starting with determinate being. The determinate being is the commodity. It has these two moments which are operative in it. The process of becoming of the commodity. Oh, okay. Oh my God, I'm hurting my brain here, because within the realm of thought, the process of being in nothing, becoming determinate being is becoming, right? It's simple. It's bare abstract. But when I say that the process of coming to be, of becoming of the commodity, is literally the production process, like all of it, right? The combination of labor, power, and of materials of production. It's it's far more it's far more complex a web of determinacy than something as simple as being a nothing, becoming determinate being. It Wow. So you could almost say that the totality um, of the becoming of the commodity is the entire process, the whole book, the absolute of the it's for anyone watching, it's dangerous to try to use Hegelian terms uh, to enunciate things. You get into dangerous territory, and then you want to take it back. Ugh. But still, the commodity is the element. Being is the element of the absolute. Being in the unity of thought and thinking. So there's that. Sorry, I'm talking out loud. I'll shut up. I'm really hurting my brain, like trying to square the two together. Um, Now I'm thinking, would he have started out with value and use value? Would that have made sense? Well, anyway, there are definitely two moments of the commodity. Okay, so um, we're 4 minutes till, but we can go past that if you like, because we have the quantum which we were talking about, and he goes on for some length, and the main topic is that the real infinite is expressed in the fraction 2/7 versus the expression 0.285714 to infinity, right? And and the way he expresses this is that if there's the decimal form, the complete amount that you're looking for of the quantum that you want to express is always outside of the number. It's always that way, and you're never going to get to it. But in the fraction 2/7, which contains the infinity, everything's there, like in its completeness, right? And I think, what did he call it, Kyle? I think he called it like a qualitative quantity or a quantitative quality. I forget what it was, but he said at that level. Oh dear, my brain's lost it.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So page 247, it says, now in the infinite series, which is supposed to represent the fraction as an amount, the aspect of the fraction as a ratio has vanished, and with it, there has vanished too the aspect which, as we've already shown, makes the fraction in its own self infinite. But this infinity has entered in another way. The series, namely, is itself infinite. Now, the nature of this infinity of the series is self-evident. It is the spurious infinity of the progression. So there it is with the decimal number. The series contains and exhibits the contradiction of representing that which is a relation possessing a qualitative nature as devoid of relation as a mere quantum, as an amount, right? So if you flatten the quality of the infinity and expressed in the fraction into as a mere quantum, right? You're erasing the quality. He says that the consequence of this is that the amount which is expressed in the series always lacks something, so that in order to reach the required determinateness, we always go further than the terms already posited. The law of the progression is known. It is implicit in the determination of the quantum contained in the fraction and in the nature of the form in which it is supposed to be expressed. By continuing the series, the amount can, of course, be made as accurate as required. And that's really the point. When you're doing practical work with these kinds of numbers, the more accurate you are, the better outcome, I guess, you have with whatever you're building. Circuit board, a church made of wood, something like that. Your measurements, are as perfect as they can be for practical work, right? But representation by means of the series continues to remain only an ought to be. It is burdened with a beyond which cannot be sublated, because to express as an amount that which rests on a qualitative determinateness is a lasting contradiction.
So you fall back into qualitative and spurious infinity when we do this?
Well, only if you try to
Right.
only if you try to flatten the new number,
Right.
which is the ratio. In this infinite series, this inexactitude is always present, whereas in the genuine mathematical infinite, there is only an appearance of inexactitude. These two kinds of mathematical infinite are as little to be confounded as are the two kinds of philosophical infinite. In representing the genuine mathematical infinite, the form of series was used originally and has recently again been invoked, but this form is not necessary for it. On the contrary, the infinite infinite of the infinite series is essentially different from the genuine infinite, as the sequel will show. Indeed, the form of infinite series is even inferior to the fractional expression. So let's put this in practical terms. You're doing astrophysical calculations to get to the moon, or say to Mercury or Venus, right? And your calculations run into one of these infinites, as I'm sure they did. Okay, that's all I got. If you guys know how to fill in those blanks, great. I don't. But I get the feeling, looking at some of this stuff, that the difference in using calculus with limits and with infinitesimals comes into it, and one gets you closer than the other in terms of accuracy. Because I mean, if you're accurate to the point where when you arrive at your destination, you're basically in orbit of a giant planet, right? You don't have to be that exact. But if you're aiming for a moving object that's like a comet, that's vanishingly small in the astronomical plane, you know, you need to have a lot more exactness when you arrive, or you're going to arrive and there's going to be nothing there. The comet's all the way over that way, like 60 miles, 60 billion miles, more like.
From what I read, Hegel's discussion of calculus, he actually covers two approaches, one based on the concept of the infinitesimal and one based on the limits.
Yes.
But his understanding of limits is basically limited to what Lagrange had to say about it, which as Hegel correctly pointed out, wasn't really any more rigorous than what the advocates of the infinitesimal had developed.
Yeah, and that's believable for its time.
Yeah, I mean the development of foundations calculus based on the concept of limit that was developed in a much more rigorous manner a little bit later on. So I don't think Hegel never really got to see that.
Yeah.
Now the thing is that a lot of people have taken Marx to task because when Marx studied the calculus, he also got interested in the issues of the foundational calculus.
Yeah.
And the criticism is he did not really understand what the theory of limits which is by his time was pretty well developed. He was a generation or two behind on it.
I get the impression he was strictly an amateur
Yeah.
And he had notes. And then when he died, his notes were eventually published and called, "Here is the cutting edge of Marx's mathematics." And I'm like, no, he just took notes while reading. Like, he took notes for decades on political economy.
Yeah.
While reading, okay? But no one should take those notes and say, this is the finished product.
Yeah.
They were not the finished product, right? But for some reason.
And the thing was the reason why Marx studied the calculus in the first place is because he realized right away it would be useful in economics.
Yeah.
And in his day, mathematical economics was still very, very new.
Yeah.
So he was actually cutting edge on it, on the subject, because just a few people who were doing work on it. He was one of the few people.
Yeah.
And to some extent, his work was in that area was hindered because he did not know anything about matrices. And Arthur Cayley, who developed matrix algebra, was a contemporary of Marx, but the problem was in Marx's day, only a few mathematical specialists knew anything about that subject. So
yeah.
I mean, later after Marx's time, the marginalists would take up both calculus and use of matrices in applying it to development of their economic theories.
Yeah.
And to some extent, actually, there seems to inspire some resistance among Marxists against using mathematics and economics, which was certainly not Marx's view of this. Marx believed that mathematics would become very useful.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of Marxist economists said, we don't want to do that. And I mean, there was a whole debates about that in the Soviet Union went on for decades.
Yeah. Okay. It's 9:08. I think I'm going to leave it there. Let me assign some pages though for everyone listening, and of course for me, Kyle, and Jim, and Doug, who may or may not watch this in the next week. Who knows? So we should read from page 253. And if you haven't read up to it, read up to 253 from the logical portion we just got done with. Sorry. It's a long, long chapter. Do we even hit the end of it? Okay. I'm going to say read to the end of the remark. 253 to 274. I know it's a lot. And if for whatever reason you can't do the math while you're going, read the qualitative section, because after he does the math, it's like Marx. He tends to make his remark statements next to it, right? And because it's a remark, we can read more. None of this is the logical section. He's just taking you through. What is he taking you through, Jim? Like remark 2 is the purpose of the differential calculus deduced from its application, which we're not into yet. But remark 1 is just, what is it? It's the specific nature of the notion of the mathematical infinite. So the mathematical infinite, which is not the spurious infinity, but the real infinite, I think. I could be wrong about that. He covers the notion as closely as he can in a remark. So none of it's logical. So just read to the end of remark 1, and then we'll talk more about it more comprehensively when we get back. Sound good, comrades?
Sounds good.
All right. You all have a great night. It's great to see you, and we'll be talking offline about it.